I still remember that night, the one everyone said would go down in company history. Seattle was drizzling, like the sky itself was pouring a toast. The 27th floor of the VitalMetrics Tower glowed with golden light, reflections of raised glasses shimmering across the glass walls. A champagne cork popped, foam splashed straight onto the TV broadcasting the press conference. Someone burst out laughing. Serves that old screen right, I smiled, holding my glass of water. The air reeked of mixed scents: champagne, balloons, and that unmistakable, startup victory smell you only recognize after surviving too many of them. On the screen, VitalMetrics X, Metasphere, $60 million acquisition. $60 million, 2 years of my life, thousands of lines of code, dozens of sleepless nights, and above all, the belief that someday real work would finally be seen. Cheers, team, Richard Kane shouted, his voice cutting through the music. The room was filled with clinking glasses. I stepped back, leaning against the table, watching the golden bubbles flicker like 100 tiny eyes. Richard climbed onto the stage, microphone in hand, like a born showman. New suit, red tie, and the grin of someone who just won the lottery. We did the impossible. Metasphere didn't just buy our tech, they bought our vision. Our vision, I repeated silently. Or yours, Richard? He went on, waving his hand like a campaign speaker. And of course, none of this would have happened without the incredible teamwork of everyone at VitalMetrics. Applause exploded. No one said my name, not a single word about the person who designed the analytics system, the very foundation that made Metasphere sign that $60 million check. Someone behind me whispered, "Emma must be proud right now." I turned, smirking. Yeah, proud. Like a bee watching someone brag about her honey. They laughed, but I wasn't joking. I was just tired. Tired of watching my work wrapped in speeches that never carried my name. Richard walked over, his cologne mixing with the sharp scent of champagne. He patted my shoulder like a benevolent mentor. Emma, you're the unsung star of this project. I took a sip of water, smiling faintly. Unsung, sure, just missing the star part. He laughed, not getting it, and walked away. The music picked up again. A bright pop beat. I glanced around, the younger staff dancing, a few people live streaming the historic win. On the wall, the VitalMetrics logo spun in LED light, almost whispering, "All of this was built on your code." I slipped out of the party, down the quiet hallway. Through the glass, the city stretched out, lights reflecting in the rain like endless strings of code, precise, beautiful, and cold. My phone buzzed, an internal email from the CEO. Subject: Team VitalMetrics, you made history. I opened it, a short paragraph, 10 lines thanking all departments who contributed to this historic milestone. My name wasn't there. I chuckled softly, the sound disappearing into the hum of the air conditioner. Some silences look like surrender. In truth, they're observing, recording every detail. Back inside, Richard lifted his glass again. And now, let's toast to a bright future ahead. I watched him through the glass, his reflection slightly distorted, lights flickering across his face like a fading film reel. Yeah, I thought, a bright future, just not yours. I slipped my phone into my pocket. The glass of water in my hand was still half full. I raised it, watching the clear liquid catch the light. Congratulations, VitalMetrics, I whispered. You just signed your own verdict, and you don't even know it yet. Then I drank it down. I stood there a moment longer, watching the city shimmer in the rain. The red beacon of the Space Needle pulsed in the distance, steady, cold, patient. Anyone who's ever worked in this world knows the feeling. That moment when your effort gets swallowed by the laughter of people who couldn't write a single line of code. And now I turn to you. Yes, you, listening to this story. Have you ever been overlooked at work? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and if you love stories where justice is served, without getting your hands dirty, hit subscribe, because this story is only the beginning. The next morning, the VitalMetrics office glowed under Seattle's pale white light, the kind that makes you unsure whether the sky has cleared or just stopped raining for a while. I arrived early, as always. Same old black coffee from the worn out machine, same dull hum of the servers down the hall. The only difference was the inbox. The CEO's congratulatory email had nothing new except a few emoji chains. I was reviewing some system logs when Richard pinged me on Slack. Got a minute? Before I could reply, he was already standing at my door. White shirt, loosened tie, face glowing like he was still basking in last night's after party. Emma, can we talk for a second? He said, with that tone people use before saying something not a big deal. Small meeting room, round table, a pot of stale coffee from yesterday. Richard set his laptop down, typed a few keys, and spun the screen toward me. A spreadsheet, names and numbers. My name sat in the fourth row. Under consulting compensation, it read, 150,000, with a red line through it labeled deferred. I looked at him. What does deferred mean? He smiled, the way adults smile when explaining taxes to a child. Just a temporary hold. We're realigning the bonus structure post-acquisition. Metasphere's new policy. I nodded slowly, repeating his words. New policy. It would have sounded reasonable if he wasn't saying it to the person who'd personally negotiated the licensing terms with Metasphere 2 years ago. I spoke calmly, every word measured. Richard, Section 14.3 of the license agreement clearly states that usage rights remain valid only if the technical lead receives full consulting compensation. If you withhold that payment, the system automatically loses its license. He paused, then smiled again, leaning back in his chair. Emma, that clause is just a safeguard. It doesn't actually apply here. Even if it did, legally, the system belongs to the company now. You understand that, right? His tone was light, but his eyes carried that same smug confidence of someone who never reads what he signs. I didn't answer. I just glanced at his coffee cup. Dark liquid, thin oil swirling on top, like the surface film of deceit. Richard leaned back, fingers interlaced. Don't take this the wrong way, Emma. No one's denying your contribution. It's just policy. Don't make it personal. Personal? I echoed, almost laughing. 16-hour workdays. Nights debugging servers till 3 in the morning. 9-hour negotiation calls with Metasphere. Alone, because he'd gone golfing. And now, a $150,000 line struck through in Excel, all thanks to policy. I stood up, pushed my chair back into place, polite, precise. I understand. Policy. Richard smiled, thinking it was over. He had no idea that in my mind, every line of code, every clause he'd skimmed, every careless signature of his had just lit up like coordinates on a map, leading straight to the system's single point of failure. I went back to my desk. Outside the glass, Seattle was still raining. I opened the original licensing contract, the PDF I'd encrypted years ago. VitalMetrics Clause 14.3 Sci Exec V7. Every word pulsed like a heartbeat. The license remains valid only under continuous, compensated employment of the designated technical lead. Any interruption of compensation nullifies the license automatically. No may. No subject to. Just one phrase. Automatically nullifies. I leaned back, listening to the rain tapping steadily against the glass. Behind me, I heard Richard's footsteps leaving the room. Leather soles on wood, steady and smug. Each step sounded like another nail sealing the lid on the coffin he'd just built for himself. I wasn't angry. I didn't need to be. I just felt clear. Clear that they never saw me as someone to credit, only someone who kept the machine running. Clear that justice, if it ever came, wouldn't arrive through speeches, but through code, contracts, and the fine print they never read. At noon, the cafeteria buzzed with chatter. Everyone is talking about bonus day. I sat alone, listening. A young engineer grinned. I got 20 grand. Bet Emma got 3 times that. I smiled. Yeah, maybe. No one knew my 3 times was now a negative. That afternoon, I opened my private archive. Buried deep inside, contracts vendor metasphere, clause backups. I checked the original copy, confirmed Richard's digital signature, everything intact, untouched. I saved an additional backup to an external drive, then slid it into my desk drawer. The glow from my monitor reflected off the desk. Cold, blue, perfect. I whispered, not sure to whom. If they want to play policy, I've got clauses of my own. Outside, the rain grew heavier, and beneath that rain, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Slow, deliberate, patient. I knew, from that very second, the game had begun. Seattle that night was strangely quiet. Rain fell in fine threads, painting long streaks across the window. The whole city seemed to breathe softly, leaving a rare hush after days of noise. Only a few lights remained on in the VitalMetrics office. In the small room at the end of the hall, a monitor cast a cold blue glow. I sat there, leaned back in my chair, listening to the cooling fan hum, a steady sound like the heartbeat of a loyal machine. No anger left, no hurt. The feeling now was like a lake after the wind, still, but deep and cold. The licensing agreement lay open on the screen, the familiar title in the corner, VitalMetrics Licensing Agreement, Clause 14.3. My eyes rested on the sentence I knew by heart. License validity contingent on full compensated employment of the technical lead. Plainly put, if the licensee stops paying my consulting fee, the system license automatically becomes invalid. A dry, legal line, but a buried mine under the foundation Richard had never noticed. I opened another window, the folder with every project document. The structure was tidy like a map. Backups arrow, contracts arrow, vendor arrow, Metasphere arrow, clause. Backups. Everything was organized with intent, meticulous, like a go board where every black stone had 10 moves calculated in advance. The external drive sat beside the keyboard. Its LED blinked green. Clicks marked each completed file copy. Log by log, contract by contract, email by email, everything duplicated and sealed. This was not the act of revenge. It was simply the self-defense of someone who understood the rules. They had policies. I had clauses. Outside, the rain fell steadily. Light splashed across the desk like scattered memories. In the corner, a framed photograph of a man with salt and pepper hair smiled kindly. Father. He had told me that silence at work is not always endurance. Sometimes it is the way you let others reveal their errors. I touched the frame lightly. It was cold, but somehow steady. I remembered his words, and I told myself I would not let them take what belonged to me. A notification blinked. Auto backup completed. I unplugged the drive, slid it into a padded case, and locked it in the drawer. The click sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Before shutting down, the cursor blinked on a draft email to the legal department. The subject noted a compliance risk tied to Clause 14.3. The message sat unsent as a small reminder in the outbox. But one press of send would be the first stone dropped into that calm lake, starting a ripple no one expected. The wall clock read just after 1 in the morning. The second hand ticked like a countdown. I put on my coat and left the office. The corridor lights cast pale strips on the wet floor. When the elevator doors closed, one image filled my head. Richard smiling with smug certainty, convinced he had won. People like him never see the lightning until they hear the thunder. Outside, the night. Air was cold and damp. Rain soaked the collar, and strangely, it made breathing easier than it had in a long time. A clear feeling rose up, not hatred, but clarity. On the wet street, headlights stretched across the pavement like thousands of code lines running in parallel in my head. Everything was ready. It was only a matter of timing. If VitalMetrics thought that clause was mere paperwork, they were about to learn that sometimes the smallest overlooked thing becomes the fatal strike. The next morning, the office felt different. No one said anything outright, but the looks between people were heavier than usual. It was as if the whole system was sending a silent message that everyone understood. Rumor spread faster than any data pipe. Someone said security was rechecking my access. Another whispered that the board suspected I had stored confidential files outside the company system. Within hours, everything shifted. My corporate account was suspended. The inbox showed the blunt notice access restricted due to internal review. The tools I used every day, the system dashboard, server credentials, source control admin, all displayed a red lock icon. No official announcement, no calls, just a silence engineered to isolate one person. At lunch, the pantry, usually loud, went quiet. Colleagues lowered their voices when they saw me. Some averted their eyes. A few forced smiles. The feeling felt familiar, like those scenes in films where the protagonist is falsely accused. The difference is, this was real life, and my only alleged crime was knowing a clause Richard preferred no one mention. Richard appeared then, clutching a steaming coffee, smiling in that way that measures rather than greets. He said, "Matt fact. I heard security flagged some odd accesses from your account." I raised an eyebrow. My systems are no mystery to anyone who has used them, only to those who never touch the code. He shrugged and smiled. "Probably a mistake," he said. "Just protocol. After a merger, everyone is reviewed. It would have been plausible if only my account had not been the only one locked." That afternoon, an all-hands email went to the engineering team announcing a temporary reassignment of access for audit purposes. I read it and smiled. Richard was making his first move, cutting sightlines, choking off information, isolating the prey. In this industry, when you cannot remove someone by argument, people make them vanish through access control. But he forgot one thing. Data is not only inside systems, it lives with the people who built it. I remember every snippet, every architecture, every handshake protocol he never understood. Later, HR called. Her voice was soft, but every sentence sounded scripted. "We need to clarify some activities related to data access on the project," she said. "During the review, your work account will be temporarily suspended. We appreciate your cooperation." I answered plainly, "I will cooperate as long as you read the contract carefully." The call ended, and my phone screen reflected my calm face. Not angry, not panicking, just watching a play for which I already knew the script. That evening, a message came from a junior engineer who used to be on my team. He texted quickly, "Richard is telling people you moved data out. They're going to investigate for real." A moment of silence. Then I replied, "Thanks. Say nothing more and do not defend me. Just keep doing your job. Do not drag anyone into this fight. Those who stand too close get hurt." I closed the phone and sat by the window, watching the city dissolve in rain. Headlights smeared gold across the pavement like broken fragments. The room held only the air conditioner and the wall clock ticking steadily. I took a sip of cold coffee, and its bitter aftertaste lingered. Richard thinks he is controlling everything. He forgot that silence can be a strategy too. I logged into the backup account that no one at the company knew about. The backups from the previous night were intact. I reviewed everything: the contract, emails, technical docs, and the transaction logs between VitalMetrics and Metasphere. Each line of data was a tile, and the full picture was coming into focus. They had not only made mistakes, but they had tried to hide them. I unfolded the printed contract I kept in its envelope. Under clause 14.3 were two signatures, mine and Richard Kane's. His signature slanted, messy, like a man signing in a hurry to catch lunch. One signature is enough to bury a company if needed. I set the paper down and thought, there is no need to act immediately. People like Richard speed up their own destruction. Just stand still and watch him tighten the rope he thinks is binding someone else. Night deepened and the office darkened. On the screen, the cursor blinked on the draft that still sat unsent. Its cold blue light washed the desk like a sharpened blade. A single thought came clear. If they think silence equals surrender, it is time to teach them another definition. 3 days later, the official internal email landed. The subject line was shamelessly simple: access suspended pending security investigation. No explanation, no meeting. A 10-year career folded into one lifeless sentence. When I finished reading, there was no anger left, only a hollow, as if someone had pulled the power plug from a system that was still running. Company laptop confiscated, badge deactivated. Everything happened fast, neat, and cold, like an administrative procedure. People avoided eye contact when I walked the halls. A few familiar faces nodded briefly, then looked back down at their screens. Richard was nowhere on the floor, probably lunch with the CEO to report the situation. That afternoon, the rain kept falling. I sat across the building in a cafe, looking through the fogged glass. My personal laptop sat closed in front of me. The screen reflected my own calm face, but my eyes felt heavy. No access, no voice. My story, from a builder, had become the suspect. Part of me wondered if it was worth it. 2 years of work traded for a question mark in an internal file. Something inside cracked, not pride, but a sense of being methodically betrayed. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A woman's voice, measured and slow. Hello, this is Rebecca Stone, legal at Metasphere. Do you remember the contract negotiations 2 years ago? The name landed familiar. The short-haired woman who had insisted on Clause 14.3 during that online meeting. Yes, I said. I remember. Rebecca paused, then asked, I just received a copy of the signed contract with your signature, sent from your personal address a few weeks ago. Did you tell anyone at VitalMetrics about this? I smiled quietly. No, I said. I only wanted someone to know it existed. Rebecca's small laugh sounded less like joy and more like the weary sigh of someone who had watched too many contracts trampled. Do you realize they just put themselves in breach? She asked. I guessed so, but I do not want to rush things. I want them to walk themselves to the edge. Silence on the line for a beat. Then Rebecca said, in a low, steady voice, if VitalMetrics fails to pay that consulting fee, the clause kicks in and they lose the right to use the entire system. Outside, the rain drummed on the awning like data flowing through the old systems I used to monitor. Thank you, Rebecca, I said softly. Let them think I am gone. After the call, I sat very still for a long time. Watching the rush of people through the glass, I felt detached from that noisy world. A cafe, a cold cup of tea, and a contract waiting to be named. On the TV, the business news ran stories about tech deals and companies on the rise. The anchor's voice made me laugh. VitalMetrics was described that way once, except their momentum was heading straight for a cliff. That night, the rain continued. I hung my coat, flipped on the light, and the small apartment filled with a quiet warmth. On my desk, my father's photo sat where he always did, the man who taught me how silence can be timing. I sat and traced the frame with my finger. He was right, I thought. When they want to believe you are weak, let them. That is when they are most careless. The laptop's blue glow flickered on the wall like breath. I opened the evidence folder. Backups intact. The contract was there, Richard Kane's name under authorized signature. Everything was ready. Only one small detail was missing: time. In the draft email to Rebecca, the last line read, if they continue to ignore this clause, you will receive formal notification from VitalMetrics soon. When that happens, I hope you will know what to do. My finger hovered over send. No need to press it. They will call Rebecca themselves soon enough. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept through. Outside, the rain kept falling, but now it sounded like a countdown. That morning started like any other, a kind of fragile normal that could shatter with a single wrong click. Outside, Seattle wasn't raining. A rarity. Pale sunlight glinted off the glass tower, lighting up the VitalMetrics logo as if the company were proud of its own reflection. I sat in the same old cafe, steam rising from a white ceramic cup, watching that building through the window. From here, I could see the tech floor, the one that stayed lit late into the night. It was still glowing today, but that light was about to change color. At 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A short message from an old friend on the DevOps team. The analytics system isn't responding. The main dashboard shows a license error. Something's off. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then set it down. No smile, no surprise, just that strange quiet you feel in the background of a scene when you already know how it ends. A minute later came the second message. Executives are in an emergency meeting. Everyone's panicking. Metasphere can't access the data either. I took a sip of coffee, hot, bitter, and sharp enough to taste justice. In my head, I could see the familiar lines of code, the authentication module I'd buried deep inside the system. Clause 14.3 wasn't just on paper, it was coded. A self-verifying mechanism that checked the validity of the license against contractual conditions. And if the consulting fee wasn't paid on time, the system automatically revoked access. Every dataset, every dashboard, every API call. Before 9, an email arrived from Metasphere in my personal inbox. Please confirm if the VitalMetrics analytics platform has stopped responding since 7:48 a.m. All queries return a license error. Is the contract still valid? I read it and smiled faintly. Valid. Such a simple word, yet heavy enough to crush a company. Across the street, the glass doors of VitalMetrics slammed shut. Inside, silhouettes rushed in chaos. IT staff ran past, holding laptops, faces pale. Richard was there too, easy to spot even from a distance. Fast stride, crooked tie, phone pressed to his ear, talking nonstop but saying nothing that mattered. I could picture it clearly. Dashboards all red, warnings flashing, reports failing to load, APIs spitting out. License validation failed. And somewhere in the system logs, a quiet line appears. Technical lead compensation not verified. License suspended. The phone rang. This time, VitalMetrics' office line. I let it ring 3 times before answering. A nervous assistant's voice trembled through the line. Hi, Emma. Could you maybe check with Metasphere? They said the system stopped because of some clause. I answered calmly. If they're having a license issue, they should reread the contract. Page 12, clause 14.3. Silence. Then the frantic tapping of keys on the other end. Less than 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. A man's voice now, deeper, sharper. Richard. Emma. What the hell is happening? What did you do to the system? I set my cup down and replied evenly. Nothing. The system is just doing what it was built to do. Built to do? He shouted. The whole company's frozen. Reports are dead, clients can't log in, Metasphere's demanding answers. Do you understand how serious this is? I paused, then spoke softly. Do you remember the contract, Richard? I told you about clause 14.3. You should have read it. The sound on the other end turned heavy, breathing, tense, almost panicked. You're sabotaging us, he growled. This is illegal. No, Richard, I said quietly. I just wrote the law you forgot to read. I ended the call and exhaled. Not with satisfaction, but with clarity. The anger was gone. What remained was the calm of someone who can finally see the whole board. An hour later, a text from Rebecca arrived. VitalMetrics just contacted me. They confirmed a license failure. The contract's been breached. I'm reporting this to legal counsel. I read the message 3 times. Each time, my heart grew stiller. Not joy, not sorrow, just the quiet recognition of a collapse you'd mapped out stone by stone. By afternoon, the news had leaked. Tech media accounts began posting. VitalMetrics suspends analytics platform following unexplained technical issue. Technical issue. A gentle phrase for a legal implosion. I left the cafe, walking slowly along the sidewalk. The air carried a trace of salt, the kind that seeps in from the sound on windy days. Behind me, the VitalMetrics tower still glowed, lights on, but nothing inside was running. A strange feeling settled in. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the realization that justice doesn't need applause. It arrives like rain. Steady, patient, inevitable. At the intersection, the red light reflected on the wet street, glowing like a thin streak of blood. I turned once more toward the tower. Maybe, up on the top floor, Richard was barking orders, yelling into phones. But it wouldn't matter. The system only listened to one person, the one they'd refused to pay. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets and kept walking. Somewhere behind me, car horns echoed through the city. Everything kept moving, except for one system, the one that had been the heart of VitalMetrics. And me, I was simply the person who wrote the line of code that taught it when to stop breathing. 2 days after the system went down, VitalMetrics was like a ship adrift in rough seas. From the outside, the building still gleamed through the night, but inside, chaos reigned. Reports wouldn't load, dashboards went blank, and shareholder presentations were canceled. I heard the CEO had postponed the meeting with Metasphere 3 times, and Richard had been called into legal over and over. The press began asking, how much data can a data company lose before it loses itself? On the third morning, my phone rang. Unknown number, Seattle area code. I knew who it was before I answered. Rebecca's voice came steady and low. Emma, I'm at VitalMetrics headquarters. They're in an emergency meeting. Want the good news or the bad first? Surprise goes better with cold coffee, I said. She laughed softly. They're trying to fix the system by hiring an external engineering team. But per clause 14.3, that's invalid. Any operation during a breach counts as unauthorized access. And the bad news? I asked. Richard's blaming you. He says you planted that clause to extort the company. I was quiet for a few seconds. Steam rose from my cup, the bitter smell cutting through the air. Finally, I said, he's half right. I planted that clause, not for money, but to remind them signatures still mean something. Rebecca chuckled, that knowing kind of laugh. Then they're about to learn that lesson. The meeting's starting. I'll update you. By noon, a short text from her arrived. Richard's lying. I projected the contract for the entire board to see. Clause 14.3. The CEO and HR went silent. I could picture the room, the long table, the harsh white lights, the large screen glowing with words that could end careers. Rebecca was standing at the head, calm and precise, while Richard tried to hide his panic behind a crooked smile. Do you remember signing this, Richard? She must have asked. The license is tied to the consulting fee of the technical lead, meaning Emma, and you failed to pay it. Silence must have followed. I could almost hear the pulse of the room through the open call. Then the CEO's voice broke it. What does that mean for us? Rebecca answered, cold and clear. It means every use of company data in the last 72 hours is unlawful. Every report sent to investors is invalid. A chair scraped. Probably Richard. He tried to talk over her. This is just a technical glitch. We can fix it, pay the balance. No, Rebecca interrupted. Clause 14.3 leaves no room for post-breach correction. The missed payment triggered automatic license revocation. The system is functioning exactly as designed. In the background, I heard chaos. A hand slamming on the table, papers shuffling, Richard's ragged breathing. She planned this, he shouted. She wanted to destroy the company, to make me look like a fool. Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Then her voice came sharp as glass. No, Richard. She just wanted you to read what you signed. I laughed quietly, not from joy, but from the strange satisfaction of watching the final curtain fall. By late afternoon, Rebecca sent a summary of the meeting. The CEO had acknowledged the breach and ordered finance to settle all outstanding obligations with technical lead Emma Collins, effective immediately. He also announced the suspension of Richard Kane pending internal review. The last line of Rebecca's message made me pause. I've never seen a man's face drain of color so fast after realizing 4 lines of text could bring down an entire empire. I read it several times, feeling the weight of it, like watching the end of a film, one you'd written, directed, and quietly walked away from. Evening fell. The neon lights of the cafe shimmered against the glass. Rain started again, soft but steady, tapping on the roof. I sipped what was left of my cold coffee and looked outside. Across the street, the VitalMetrics building dimmed floor by floor. The sight felt strangely peaceful, like the quiet closing of a small era. My phone buzzed. The CEO. I let it ring a while before answering. His voice was low, tired. Emma, on behalf of the company, I want to apologize. Things should never have gone this far. We accept your terms. Full consulting fee, plus 40% compensation. And we'd like to end this peacefully. I spoke slowly. There was never a war, only fine print. I just wanted respect, and maybe a thank you. Silence stretched. Then he said quietly, "You'll have both." The call ended. No applause, no soundtrack. Only rain. Steady, cold, clean. I sat still, looking at the table. Between the papers and the laptop, my father's photo caught the warm glow of the lamp. His gentle smile seemed to hold the same calm I felt now. If he were alive, he would probably just smile and say, "You did the right thing." I tilted my head slightly, whispering to the photo, "It wasn't revenge, Dad, it was justice." The money arrived the next afternoon. No flowers, no public thank you. Just a dry notification on the banking app. Incoming wire transfer. VitalMetrics Holdings. I stared at the number for a long time, not out of surprise, but because it looked unfamiliar. Years of effort, sleepless nights, lines of code, forgotten meetings, all condensed into one tidy transaction, commas neatly dividing the digits. I didn't smile, I just nodded. Justice doesn't need decoration, it only needs clarity. In my inbox, an email from Rebecca followed soon after. They've completed the payment, including the 40% compensation. The contract is now reinstated. I recommend you keep the original copy. You might need it someday. And Emma, they're genuinely scared. I laughed softly. Not the laugh of victory, but of closure. The end of a chapter that should have ended long ago. That noon, I decided to go back to the VitalMetrics building. Not to work, just to say goodbye. The receptionist looked at me, hesitant. "You really came back?" "Just briefly," I said, "to say goodbye to the person I used to be." The office looked the same, white, sleek, spotless. But something had changed. No loud laughter from the conference room, no smug air of superiority. They said Richard had resigned the day after the meeting. Fitting. A man like him could never stand the weight of bowing his head. I walked down the hallway, past the familiar desks where my old coffee cup once sat, past the printer where I'd waited for the first contract to roll out. Everything is still there, except the sense of belonging. Someone else was in my old seat, a young woman, thin, bright-eyed. When she saw me, she jumped up, startled. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you'd be here." "It's okay," I smiled. "Just pretend I stopped by to wish you luck." I left a sticky note on the desk before walking out. "Don't let anyone forget what you've done, and if someone ever calls you just an employee, smile, because that means they're afraid it's true." When I stepped outside, sunlight spilled down the stairs, warm and blinding. It felt like walking out of a long storm and finally seeing the sky again. I turned onto the side street nearby. The same cafe still stood there, my usual window seat still empty. A hot cappuccino arrived, thick foam, soft aroma. This time I drank slowly, unhurried. No phone buzzing, no urgent messages, just voices, doors opening, wind slipping through the glass. For the first time in months, peace felt real. I opened my laptop and entered a new folder called Newgrounds. Inside was the sketch of a small project, an analytics system for nonprofit organizations. No shareholders, no hidden policies, just data, people, and transparency. As I typed the first lines of code, sunlight slanted across the window, laying gold over the keyboard. The feeling was different. Not to prove anything, not to fight anyone, but to build something better. My phone buzzed again. A message from Rebecca. "Just left VitalMetrics HQ. The CEO sends his thanks. For real. They're turning Clause 14.3 into a standard model for future contracts. Looks like you just taught a company how to respect." I typed back, "Maybe." And I learned how to leave without regret. A moment later, she sent another line. "We should meet soon. I have something interesting. An independent project." I looked at the screen and smiled, not rushing to reply. Outside, people walked by, living, working, chasing their own rhythms. Everything was normal again. But for me, normal meant something new. Not safety through repetition, but the freedom to choose when to work, with whom, and for what reason. I closed the laptop and stood up. Before leaving, I glanced back once. Outside, the sky was clear, sunlight stretching like a carpet toward a new chapter. In my mind, a familiar voice echoed, deep, calm, unmistakably my father's. Respect isn't given, Emma. It's earned. And today, you took back both. I smiled. For the first time, the smile carried no bitterness. A few months later, I left Seattle. That autumn city was still damp and cold. The rain still fell in fine threads like mist. Only this time, I carried no weight with me. A small suitcase, a few clothes, a hard drive of old data, and my father's worn notebook, all fit neatly into one simple bag. I chose Portland, quieter, smelling of pine and hand-roasted coffee. The new apartment was on the third floor, with windows facing the lake. Every morning, when I drew the curtains, soft gold light spread across the still water, ripples shining like slow breaths. I made tea, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. No dashboards, no KPI charts, no urgent emails. Only a blank canvas for a new project. Something I called Clarity, a nonprofit data platform that gave small organizations free access to analytics tools. No investors are giving orders, no bosses assigning value. Every line of code now served one purpose: to create real value for real people. Sometimes, while working, I still thought of VitalMetrics, not with bitterness, but the way you think of a film you once starred in. I remembered the cold lights, the smell of printer plastic, the sound of Richard's shoes echoing across the floor, and the way he smiled when he said the word policy. Strangely, those memories didn't bother me anymore. They felt like recollections from a tough training ground, the kind that shapes you, even if it bruises you first. One afternoon, Rebecca called. She said Vital Metrics had rebranded, restructured, and started over. There's a new management team, she said. They kept your technical framework exactly as it was, and they turned Clause 14.3 into a standard in all new contracts. I paused, then said, then maybe they learned something money can't buy. Respect. Rebecca laughed. I think so. And you, Emma, what's next for you? I looked out at the lake, the sunset spilling gold across the surface. Build again, I said. But this time, for the right people. A few months later, Clarity went live. No ads, no PR, just a short post I wrote on a tech forum. A system built to serve, not to rule. The post spread quickly. Thousands shared it. Young engineers sent messages of thanks. One wrote, I used to think I had to put up with unfair workplaces. Not anymore. I read them all and smiled. Not because of the praise, but because I realized my story had become a mirror for someone else's courage to stand up. One evening, the sunset burned red across the wall as I looked at my father's photo. The same gentle smile, the same kind but steady gaze. You said justice doesn't come on its own. We have to make it, I whispered. Now I understand. Justice isn't about making others fall. It's about making them see. I leaned back, breathing deeply. No smell of steel or fluorescent lights, only pine and warm tea. A thought passed through my mind. If someone asked whether I regretted any of it, the answer would be no. No regret for fighting. No regret for drawing a line. Because sometimes one small clause, a few quiet words, can save a person's dignity. I stood, opened the balcony door. The sky was changing, gold fading into violet. The wind carried the scent of water and wildflowers. The world outside was still noisy, work still spun on somewhere out there, but here, in this moment, everything was perfectly still. I remembered those first days at VitalMetrics, when I believed talent alone was enough to earn recognition. Now I know. Ability means nothing if you can't say enough. Below, the lake reflected the streetlights. Ripples rolled, shimmered, disappeared. I whispered to myself, closing the story at last. Respect isn't a gift. It's something you build with your hands, guard with your mind, and defend with your pride. A soft wind passed, brushing the curtain. I closed my eyes and smiled. In the end, justice spoke, not through slammed doors or raised voices, but through a silence strong enough to make everyone listen.